President Obama in the Middle East, with relationships in flux throughout a region in turmoil. Has he turned a page on
Assalamu alaikum.
with a new agenda in mind?
Shalom.
And as the aid flows,
Your presidency has given the closest ties between Israel and the United States a new height.
and the pressure grows, who's calling the shots on Iran and Palestine? We've come to Doha to get the regional perspective. We ask, why are the Arabs so quiet about the nuclear issue? I am Marwan Bishara, and this is Empire. Welcome to Empire. The ever-festering issue of Israel and Palestine and the urgent developments in Syria and Iran have topped the agenda of President Obama's recent Middle East trip and the Arab League summit here in Doha. But while the Arabs welcomed to their ranks the new state of Palestine and the new leaders of the Arab Spring nations, including new Syrian leaders, President Obama seemed to have one preoccupation: reaffirming and readjusting the one and only special relationship. To get the perspective from the region about this and more, we are joined by Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist, columnist, and author, currently editor-in-chief of the Bahrain-based 24-hour Al Arab news channel. Mehran Kamrava, director of the Center for International and Regional Studies at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Qatar, and author of several books, including his most recent, The Modern Middle East, A Political History Since the First World War. Robert Fisk, Middle East correspondent for The Independent, and author of several books, including The Great War for Civilization, The Conquest of the Middle East. And last but not least, Sayyid Mohammed Morandi, Associate Professor of English Literature at the University of Tehran and member of the North American Studies Department.
It's good to see you. How are you? Good to see you.
This was quite the slick, big-budget production. Barak and Benjamin hit their marks right on cue and read their lines perfectly. But this script hasn't always been this smooth. Over the past 4 years, the plot of this picture has had plenty of twists and turns. Opening scene, May 2009, the annual AIPAC conference, where Vice President Joe Biden talks tough.
You're not going to like my saying this, but not build more settlements, dismantle existing outposts, and allow the Palestinians freedom of movement.
President Obama advances the story in Cairo.
So let there be no doubt, the situation for the Palestinian people is intolerable.
Cut to March 2010. It's payback time. Biden goes to Israel, and the Israelis welcome him by announcing 1,600 new settlements in East Jerusalem.
Well, what happened there wasn't a front, it was an insult. That was distressing to everyone who is promoting the idea of peace and security in the region.
It says a lot about the current chill between the two longtime allies.
Just a couple weeks later, the world is watching as Benjamin Netanyahu goes in the back door to the White House.
Is he on his way out right now?
No, not yet.
He meets with Obama, who reportedly walks out on him at one point, meets again, and finally comes out empty-handed. No pictures, no press conference. It's the White House version of the big chill.
There are areas of agreement, there are areas of disagreement.
Congress, meanwhile, can't get enough of the guy.
Israel is what is right about the Middle East.
But the bad blood between the president and Netanyahu hasn't slowed the biblical flood of U.S. aid to Israel, most of it military. It's actually gone up during Obama's years in office. Since 1949, more than $115 billion of aid has gone to Israel, the vast majority of that in the last 40 years.
I can hardly remember a better period of
both support, American support and backing than what we have right now.
Will be resolved.
Even when Netanyahu gives the president a history lecture, as if talking to a small child, Obama seems to just grin and bear it.
Accept the grandchildren, really, and the great-grandchildren of these refugees. That's not going to happen. Everybody knows it's not going to happen.
So here's what is happening. While they're not working from the same script, these two are stuck with each other for years to come. And so, the paradox, while Obama has dropped the issue of the settlements, failed to restart negotiations, and increased U.S. aid to Israel, he is clearly decoupling the U.S. from Israel in other ways, by refusing to let Israel call the shots on Iran, and by refusing to shut out the Muslim Brotherhood. What Obama is doing is much more than just sending a message. He is changing the story. Gentlemen, welcome to Empire. Mann, let me start with you. A question for everyone. Is there any doubt about how special is the special relationship in the next 4 years?
If there was ever any doubt, it was settled by the president's recent visit to Israel. The atmospherics were extremely warm. The president reaffirmed America's commitment to Israel's security. And as we saw, the president once again turned a blind eye to the continued settlement activity and the construction of settlements. So if there was ever any doubt in America's special relationship with Israel, it was settled definitively over the last couple of weeks.
You don't think it was theatrics?
It was theatrics. It was a preposterous visit. What better symbol is there of failing American power than to have a president who, even before he goes to Israel, summons representatives of major Jewish American groups and says, I'm not going to be able to do anything, I have no plan, I have no project. How pathetic.
Even when he said a year before that he will not go unless there is a plan.
It proved, that visit, that Israeli policy in the Middle East and American policy in the Middle East is exactly the same. If anything, it proved that the Likud lobby groups in America ensure that the US marches in step with Netanyahu. It was pathetic, pitiful, sad in a way, in that Obama's not a bad man in the way that I think George W. Bush was. But he's a vain man, and he still thinks that the power of words, that words can change people. Power does, not words. And to say, oh, he's going to talk to the Israeli youth, does he think they're that much different from the government they elected?
Do you think it is a question of the Israeli lobby, the Likudniks in Washington?
100%. It is the Israeli lobby, because logically, calculation do not add much to the interest of Israel as an outpost for America. America doesn't benefit that much from Israel. Things are changing in the Middle East. American oil discoveries will make the Middle East not that significant to American interest. It will stay significant, of course, but it is as significant as any other areas, but not that special area. But now with the Arab Spring, with Arab countries going into democracy, things, Arab people taking matters into their own hands, American oil discoveries, Israel should, in principle, lose its significance, but it will not, because there will be always a Jewish strong lobby in America who will find a purpose for Israel, even though Israel will always continue to be a country behind walls.
Mohammed, first of all, you agree? And second, I don't want to get to the question of Iran yet, but don't you think at least Israel has been used as a scaring tactics against Iran?
I think Israel both uses scare tactics to force the United States to abide by Israeli demands by threatening Iran, sort of acting like a mad dog that needs to be controlled in order to, and the Americans also use that to force other countries to abide by sanctions.
But dog or otherwise, it's working, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it has been working, but I think that over the last couple of years, especially after Libya, and the changes that are now taking place across the board, and with regards to how Russia and China view the world, I think things are changing. But regarding to the question that you raised, one reason why Obama did go to Israel is because he wants to have less trouble at home with Republicans and even Democrats with regards to internal American politics. And that's extraordinary. It shows that Israel has such an impact on a president that even with regards to economic decisions and major reforms that need to be carried out in the United States because of the economic crisis, the U.S. president needs to go to Israel.
I was going to say, I think the press has something to do with the way that Obama gets away with this. You know, they're still using, I don't, but many of my colleagues in Washington are still using the cliches of the peace process. Then it breaks down and it has to be put, quote, back on track. Then we had a roadmap, which can't be put back on track because you can't put railway trains on roads. But at the end of the day, if you look at the press, newspaper and television coverage, especially in the States, of the Obama trip, it was almost as preposterous as the trip itself. It was as if nothing had happened since the Oslo Agreement.
You mean no recognition of 20 years of failure of the peace process?
No, there is no recognition. I mean, we had one Israeli writing in a Canadian newspaper saying that Dennis Ross, the biggest failure of the entire peace process, was a wonderful guy, and he was back involved in it again, and this was good news for Israelis. Well, maybe for Israelis, but not for Palestinians.
But how did you explain that President Abbas, King Abdullah, and Netanyahu are still surrounded Netanyahu talking about the peace process?
I don't think they have much other option, do they? I mean, the King of Jordan, God bless him indeed, really has no power. I mean, Netanyahu slapped him around the face so many times. I'm talking about King Abdullah of Jordan. Yeah. King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia is not involved, of course. But I think that, you see, you've got to understand that the only nuclear power we know that exists in the Middle East is indeed Israel. And when we hear Obama say, oh, all options are on the table, another cliche, the options are actually inside Israel's bunkers in the Negev desert. But even that doesn't come up. We're still seeing reporting saying Israel is believed to have nuclear weapons. Of course it has nuclear weapons, it's a nuclear power. But we even play along with that as if we don't know, despite all the revelations that we've been given in the papers.
So what does that say about the region when Israel is no longer that effective as a strategic asset, and it's a destabilizing force, but still the other regional powers still clamoring to get America's attention?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a deliberate attempt on the part of Israel and other regional powers to perpetuate the status quo, which serves everybody. Of course, the peace process serves Israel's purpose because it continues with the status quo. It continues to grab Palestinian lands.
The myth that there will be a Palestine. I go to the West Bank. There will not be a Palestine.
Exactly.
There's no room left. There's too many settlements, too many settlers' roads, too many cordons sanitaires. There's even a game reserve. I don't know whether the animals are on the inside or the outside. There cannot be a Palestine in what's left. It will not be viable, as our blessed Tony Blair keeps saying.
And exactly to that point, it serves Israel's purpose to maintain this myth of the peace process, because the alternative would be either withdrawing from Palestinian territories, which would involve certain consequences, or annexing Palestinian territories. And so a continuation of the status quo serves everybody. For the Jordanians, the Palestinians become dismembered and a non-entity. It serves Jordanian purposes. And for the Israelis, it serves purposes. And so the Americans go along, and of course it serves America's interests as well.
But here in the region, Jamal, once again, in the region, in the Middle East, if the US and Israel is so close, and we've made it clear that the special relationship is going to continue, despite the fact that they insist that occupation needs to end in Palestine, they still talk about two-state solution. They're still supporting American diplomacy in the Middle East.
Of course. The Arabs learned to divide the issue of Americans' relation to Israel from the relation with them. Traditional Arabs like us in Saudi Arabia, we feel like we owe America something. The Americans come to our aid against Saddam Hussein. So we always will see America as a superpower there for us in an hour of need. Even new countries like Egypt, the Arab Spring countries, they also rely on America.
On the question of Saudi dependence on the US, since 1945, Saudi Arabia at least used to have some say with Washington. They did so after or before Israeli independence. They said so in 1981 with the Fahd Reagan plan, and so on and so forth. What happened? Why is Saudi Arabia so incapable of having any influence on Washington now?
Number one, the Palestinian issue, it is not in the top of the agenda to the Saudis or to any other countries. We hardly have, we don't have much of a disagreement with the Americans. So why should we add with them? Americans, we see them as friends.
The 2003 war, maybe?
The only difference we have with the Americans is over the issue of Israel and Palestine. But other than that, when the Americans start those friendly intervention to start discussing with the Saudis or with the Qataris or with the Kuwaitis or with about local matters, about how are we doing about reform, about how are we doing about our war against unemployment.
Then you have a problem with that.
Then, I don't know. Then we will, it is something to witness, something for us to experience and monitor.
How does it seem from Tehran when the United States is so close to Israel affairs and interests, and yet the regional powers continue to embrace America?
I think many in Iran believe that the problem really lies with the fact that many governments in North Africa as well as West Asia, they're not reflective of public opinion. And many ordinary people do not see the American involvement in the region as benign.
We could take Turkey as an example. Turkey is becoming more and more independent of the United States, only due to its economic power. The stronger you become, the more capable you will be to declare your independence from American influence. And we can see that in Turkey. I don't know if you agree with me about that.
I think we're still making the same old mistake, since I'm the person who keeps saying we haven't got away from the myth of believing that Arab leaders represent their people. In the Gulf states, clearly where you have a large dictatorship problem, you cannot assume that the kings and the emirs and the princes are actually speaking the words of their people. When I travel to the Gulf, when I travel to Egypt, when I travel to Tunisia, for example, the softly approach of Morsi is not being echoed in the streets. What I'm finding in these countries where their dictators have gone or are going, and this applies to Syria as well, is they simply don't care very much about the Americans anymore. I mean, they'd like lots and lots of money. They might even like a little bit of democracy off the supermarket shelves. But what they're looking for is dignity and justice, which we do not intend to give the Arabs, we the West. And I think that what you're finding is that because America lost the Iraq War and is currently losing the Afghanistan war, that people no longer have a belief that America is all-powerful. I remember in Alexandria saying to an Egyptian friend of mine, I think the American Sixth Fleet was moving down the Mediterranean, and he said, they can go to the Arctic for all I care. You know, didn't mind, didn't care.
You know, what troubles me about much of this, and some of it Robert mentioned, is the fact that America, in fact, has been failing successfully, if you will, in the region. I mean, you name it, the 2003 war, not figuring out the Shah, and later on Khomeini, the Arab Spring. Certainly a good number of blunders in the region. It's just one failure after the other. But still, it's being embraced. And even Iran, if it wants to have a dialogue with anyone, it's with Washington.
Marwan, America's policy is crisis tourism. That's exactly what it is, crisis tourism. They're dipping into it.
But apparently it's everyone's favorite tourist.
Yes, of course it always will be too. But the problem is that in Washington, not only do they not understand, they don't want to understand the Middle East. Have you ever asked yourself why it is that from sea to shining sea in the United States, there are well-funded universities with departments of Islamic studies, Arabic studies, Hebrew studies, Middle East studies, and yet when you listen to the State Department spokesman or woman, it's infantile what they say.
But what I'm focusing on is the regional perspective. I need to know, if this is so true, then why even the regional powers, you just said that Turkey maybe is becoming a bit more independent, but generally speaking, is this the imperial construct? Is it the fact that there's so many divisions within the region? What is it about the United States that continues to attract everyone around?
I think it takes two to tango, and it goes back to
There's another cliche. That was used by Barak, it was used by Netanyahu.
It goes back to what Robert said. The regional regimes here are bereft of legitimacy, and in order to compensate for lack of domestic legitimacy, they have to seek shelter in the embrace of the United States. So I think on the one hand, there is this imperative coming from Washington that wants to maintain its tentacles or footprints all over the region. Yes, of course. But at the same time, we have regional leaders, as you mentioned, that are clamoring for America's embrace because their own rule is devoid of legitimacy domestically.
Is it that, or is it also that they're not capable to work with one another in the region?
Bilateral relation or bilateral trade are to the minimum in the Middle East. I'm sure if Morsi wants to look for aid, he would look first at America, at International Bank, and that's what he's working for right now. Even though he received good aid from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But that is another reason that America...
But Jamal, we can introduce, we can increase the economic activity within the Middle East. You can increase the political and strategic coordination within the Middle East. You can resolve a good number of issues, weapons of mass destruction, integration, and so on and so forth. But how much effort is going into that instead of always going to Washington?
The new Middle East, it is still being born. It will go on being restructured maybe for another 5 to 10 years. It is too early to speak about integration, working together in the Middle East. No one is sure how things will turn out in Egypt in a year.
But the problem is that a lot of people are actually thinking it's actually getting worse. I mean, it's not getting any better. It's getting more and more divided, no?
But that will take us to America again. The only solid country that the Middle Eastern leaders look at is America.
Despite everything we said earlier.
Despite
the failures, the close relationship with Israel, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think one important thing, or two important things, is that first, the United States does seem to be, at least in the eyes of many, pursuing a policy of divide and rule. And now that the United States' power is on the relative decline, we saw that in Iraq, in fact. When they took Iraq, they sort of created these sectarian divisions for their own short-term benefit to be able to rule over the country. But don't you think in that case,
Iran has played into America's hands?
Well, I think that Iran is trying to create allies. Iran did try to separate Turkey from the United States and NATO, and I think that it did show, that episode, that Turkey wasn't really prepared to be as independent as the Iranians were hoping.
But haven't you worked with the United States, I mean, in terms of Iran, in Iraq and in Afghanistan?
I think that the Iranians tried to work with the United States, but the United States really didn't, they didn't respond.
How do you explain that then? See, once again, why would Iran want to work with the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, in Afghanistan, after the Iranians spoke with Americans, they were dubbed the axis of evil. And in Iraq, the negotiations got them nowhere either. The Iranians are looking for alternatives. One of the problems is this image of the all-powerful of the United States still lingers. And for example, when the Iranians want to negotiate with the Europeans are unable to make independent decisions from the United States.
So we're always looking for someone on the outside, the region. Europeans or Americans?
I think that at least the Iranians feel that in the region, the countries that surround Iran right now are not prepared to become independent from the United States.
Hold your thoughts. We're going to take a quick news break. But when we come back, who will blink first, the US or Iran? And why are the Arabs so quiet about the nuclear issue?
Our policy is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We prefer to resolve this diplomatically, and there's still time to do so.
Diplomacy and sanctions so far have not stopped Iran's nuclear program. And as you know, my view is that in order to stop Iran's nuclear programs peacefully, diplomacy and sanctions must be augmented by a clear and credible threat of military action.
Welcome back. With my guests Jamal Khashoggi, Mehran Kamrava, Saeed Mohammed Morandi, and Robert Fisk. There has been one persistent thorn in the side of the US-Israel unbreakable alliance, namely Iran. While Benjamin Netanyahu talks tough and President Obama speaks of reward and punishment, the Arabs have been remarkably silent. What to do about Iran's nuclear future remains a regional dilemma and the latest in a series of challenges testing the special relationship. Barack Obama's first presidential visit to Israel is being officially branded as the unbreakable alliance.
You've chosen to come to Israel as the first foreign visit of your second term. Shalom.
And it even has its own logo. 4 years ago, Barack Obama sought something different.
Assalamu alaikum.
Back in 2009, these were brave new words. The language, like the message, was coded to strike a chord with an old foe.
For many years, Iran has defined itself in part by its opposition to my country. We are willing to move forward without preconditions on the basis of mutual respect.
That mutual respect may have been offered to Tehran, but it struck a nerve in Tel Aviv, which regards a nuclear-armed Iran as a threat to Israel's very existence.
What is required right now is tough action from the international community. This means crippling sanctions.
It was a stark reminder to the American president that the audacity of hope is always checked by the mendacity of Washington politics.
What we are going to be working on is developing a significant regime of sanctions that will indicate to them how isolated they are from the international community as a whole.
But that change of tune did little to placate Israel's eagerness for a preemptive military strike on Iran. As the president's cabinet, Clinton, Gates, Panetta, Petraeus, dubbed the team of rivals, united to reassure Israel of America's full support, their warnings to Iran were more a flight of fancy than a real flexing of muscle.
We will use all elements of American power to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
If they cross one of those lines I talked about, then we have all options on the table.
And in case the message wasn't clear enough,
President Barack Obama is not bluffing. He is not bluffing. But all options, including military force, are on the table.
that table has been creaking under the weight of all those options ever since the military failure in Iraq. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu's attempts to highlight Iran's nuclear threat have swung from cavalier to cartoon.
A red line should be drawn right here, before Iran completes the second stage of nuclear enrichment necessary to make a bomb.
But free of the restraints of re-election, the president has drawn up his own plan.
So let me be clear. America wants to resolve this issue through diplomacy, and we believe that there is still time and space to do so.
With John Kerry as the new Secretary of State and Chuck Hagel at Defense, Obama's team of rivals have been replaced by all the president's men, but not without controversy.
Hagel is anti-Israel.
Hagel's past criticism of the Jewish Israel lobby in Washington, the settlement building program in the West Bank, and his views on Iran have made him few friends in his own party and even fewer in Tel Aviv.
I believe, and I always have believed, that America must engage in the world. Not retreat from the world, but engage from the world.
Robust engagement with Iran seems to be America's new diplomatic mantra, a major disappointment to Israel, which sees the talks as a way for Iran to wiggle its way out of concessions rather than make them. But some believe disappointing Tel Aviv by reaching out to Tehran may just be in America's best interests.
I think if the United States does not come to terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran, we are on a trajectory for war. If we went to Tehran, accepted it, that would take this constant cycle of war, invasion, overthrow off the table.
Ultimately, there are three possible scenarios for resolving the strategic impasse. Crippling sanctions and/or credible military option, just as Netanyahu has insisted. The U.S. continues to manage the situation with a carrot-and-stick approach that has made few gains thus far. Or Iran is recognized for what it is, a regional power with a seat at the table. So, Maran, let's start with the scenarios. U.S. and Israel are eyeballing Iran. Who do you think is going to blink first?
Well, that's the question everybody's wondering about. Who's going to blink first? I don't think the Iranians are in a position to back down on the course they've taken, even with a new president that will come into office in the summer, this coming summer. So I think insofar as Tehran is concerned, they're going to stay the course. And
You don't think the sanctions are biting?
I don't think the sanctions are biting. And I don't think the Americans are going to go to war.
Doesn't feel that way from Tehran, that the sanctions are biting?
Well, I think the sanctions do hurt Iran, but I don't think that they're having the sort of effect that the Americans are looking for, and I think that's probably what you meant.
On the people either?
Well, I think if you look at polls carried out by American institutes like Gallup, the overwhelming majority of Iranians blame the United States and Western countries for the hardship. And this is a part of the problem, in fact, because to be very honest, many people actually see this sort of behavior on behalf of the United States as irrational, if not pathological, among the political elite. On the one hand, the United States is trying to make ordinary people suffer. The United States threatens Iran with war repeatedly, which is against international law. They support terrorist groups in Iran, and they carry out cyber attacks on the country on sensitive installations. And on the other hand, they speak about having dialogue. And the Iranians wonder, how can you have meaningful dialogue with a country that is trying to prevent you from even importing medicine by blocking the Iranian central bank?
Presumably the dialogue comes, no? Between enemies, not between friends?
I don't think sanctions work. They didn't work in the Spanish Civil War. They didn't work against Saddam.
You don't think they're biting in Iran?
Look, they'll bite, they'll hurt, but they don't work. They do not produce. The point is that when you're dealing with sanctions, you will always hurt the people. If you remember, when it was being explained to the American
people are hurt, they put pressure on the government.
No, but they can't, because once you're under sanctions, feeding your family is more important than overthrowing your leader. I remember seeing all these pictures from the United States with secretaries of state saying, look, we're imposing sanctions and he's still building palaces. That means the sanctions don't work. And you know, let's be frank about nuclear weapons. At the moment, we've got the North Korean crackpot threatening war or nuclear war. We're not planning to invade or attack North Korea because he's got a bomb. We're not going to attack or invade Pakistan because they've got a bomb. It would be quite logical for any Iranian to say, well, if we don't want a war with the United States, we'd better get a bomb quickly.
The whole premise of sanctions is based on the assumption that misery breeds revolt. And as Robert said, people do not rebel on an empty stomach. Actually, it's the middle classes often that are the engines of revolution, rebellion. And if you look at the recent history of the Middle East, you see that again and again. And in a country like Iran, actually, even when the sanctions do hurt, the assumption is that that the United States has a grudge against the Iranian people, not against necessarily the government, that it's actually deliberately hurting the Iranian people, punishing them for whatever reason. So I think the assumption of the sanctions are not working.
It seems for many, Jamal, that President Obama basically sold Palestine in favor of Iran, in the sense that he allowed the fox to run away with the henhouse, meaning Netanyahu in Palestine, in favor of Netanyahu backtracking on the question of Iran.
No, actually, he gave up on Palestine and he gave up on Iran altogether. When he gave the Israelis the green light to do whatever it is necessary, he put the responsibility on the Israelis. He told the Israelis indirectly, if you want to go to war with Iran, you go at it alone. We are not there to support you. I don't think the Israelis want that. The Israelis, they want the Americans to be on their side if they go to war. In the same time, we should see an opportunity here. I would like to see my country, Saudi Arabia, to grasp an opportunity. Iran will feel defeated soon, particularly in Syria. The fall of the regime in Syria is inevitable. We should push for a mindset change in Iran, not regime change.
Meaning what?
Meaning it will be a great success if we could make Iran another Turkey, a country that, regional country, work with us, do business with us, discuss oil, gas, rail, ideas like that. We need to flourish between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the region and Turkey.
How does that sound?
Well, I think the Iranians from the start have always tried for constructive relations with all the regional countries. The difference between Iran and Turkey, of course, is that Iran is very assertive of its independence. Iran would never accept to be a part of NATO, for example. Regional trade in the region is very low.
Dismal.
dismal. And for example, the Iranians, when they're looking for partners besides the United States, they're looking to China, to India, to Brazil, to the BRICS countries. But the region itself is not in a way in which these countries can work together. If the region comes together, I think the changes would be dramatic.
A big if?
A big if, yes.
Mohammed, I think you're interchangeable with Jamal on this one. I'm just watching you switch places as you speak. It's the same voice, isn't it? Well, I mean, I think both the Saudis and the Iranians, the ones who are thinking seriously, both see the Middle East as a place where you could have great economic cooperation. You wouldn't need to keep pleading for more loans from the IMF, Egypt, the European Union funding and so on.
You certainly don't need to be clients of foreign powers.
No, but we Westerners want you to be our clients, Marwan, and we will continue to ensure one way or the other, if not with military power, then with economic power, that you remain so. I think what the West is actually doing at the moment, more than I've ever seen it do before in the 37 years I've been in the Middle East, is it's using the Sunni-Shia divide over and over and over again. I've never seen so many maps in Western newspapers. You know, Lebanon, Shia at the bottom, Sunnis at the top, Christians and Sunnis in Beirut.
The Sunni-Shia divide, it is not made by Western media.
No.
It is made by us. It is made by Iran particularly. Look,
we push the wedge in all the time, Jamal.
Because it is there. It is there. Look at the friends of Iran in the region. Iran always come from the back door. Iran works with the Hezbollah because it's a Shi'i. Support a dictator because he's another Shi'i, Alawi. That is where Iran going wrong. But how Turkey behave in the Middle East, they behave through business. They come, they do not look whether you are a Sunni or a Shi'i. They look at you as a business partner. But the Iranians always look at you, are you a Sunni or a Shi'i? And Iran needs to free itself from that.
Why is it that two Sunni Gulf states are sending weapons to other Sunnis to overthrow the minority Alawi dictatorship?
Because it's a dictatorship.
You mean you want democracy in the Gulf?
Yes.
I think there's a larger issue here, and that goes to the title of this program. United States is fundamentally a regional as well as a global hegemon. And the Iranians have unsuccessfully tried to redraw the strategic map of the region. And they've been under sanctions, they've been marginalized. And so the other regional actors, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Turkey or whoever, bandwagon and seek shelter in American support, and the United States wants it this way. And so long as this remains the dominant architecture of the region, Middle East or any other subsection of it, things are not going to change. And we're going to see a continuation of marginalization of Iran, and then therefore we'll see all sorts of justifications in sectarian terms.
Iran is talking to the US about the nuclear issue. Why aren't Saudi Arabia and the rest involved? Because they are the ones who are closest to the question of nuclear, whether from Israel or Iran.
Saudi Arabia, you are right. We are not talking with the Iranians about nuclear issue. We have other issues, such the espionage case, which was revealed by the Saudi this week. But the United States is a major player, and Saudi Arabia wants to distance itself. Even if they're assuming the Americans start bombing Iran, I'm sure Saudi will make a statement condemning that attack and urging each side to constrain and restrain themselves. It's a hot issue. We want to stay from it. Even though Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar will be the first country to be impacted by it, even by, let's say, a leakage in one of the nuclear reactors. The wind will bring it to us. But this matter is very sensitive. We would much rather leave it to the Americans and to the Israelis and stay away from this confrontation, which will hurt us all.
But why aren't the Iranians talking to the Arabs about the nuclear question, or to Turkey and so on, rather than the United States?
Well, in fact, the Iranians have told Arab leaders that they're willing to cooperate in developing the nuclear program with Arab countries, and to have academic exchanges, and to help Arab countries to also develop nuclear energy. The nuclear issue in Iran for Iranians, is not about producing a nuclear bomb. It's an issue of sovereignty. The nuclear program was developed by Western governments and Western companies with Iranian money before the revolution. The French were deeply involved, the Germans, and the Americans. And the Iranians invested billions of dollars in this. It's their sovereign right. They've have thousands of people who are educated in this area. What are they going to tell these people, to go and drive taxis? Of course not. It's an issue of sovereignty. Just like when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, the Iranians defended the country's sovereignty. And in this case, this is an issue of sovereignty. So the Iranians are not going to give up nuclear enrichment. If the United States behaves in a more rational manner towards Iran, then the Iranians who are willing to give greater assurances and enrich under safeguards, as it is doing, by the way, right now. All the Iranian installations are supervised 24 hours a day by the IAEA.
This goes back to something Jamal said. I think the nuclear issue actually is a very fruitful common ground for relations between Iran and its Arab neighbors to improve. Let's remember that Iran has been on the forefront of calling for a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, a nuclear weapons-free zone.
And the Arabs have been doing the same thing.
And the Arabs have supported it. The one power that has repeatedly undermined it is the United States, because, of course, Israel has the nuclear bomb.
What will happen when the US and Iran arrive at the so-called grand bargain? They make a deal.
I don't think they will. Many people are talking about, I don't think they will reach, because Iran has to change.
Actually, I've heard that they're coming closer and closer to that, both because the sanctions are biting and because the US doesn't want war and doesn't want Iran to get to the nuclear weapon status.
No. The war that had been declared on Iran through the sanctions, through Syria, through...
by proxy, I mean.
By proxy, it hasn't been over yet. So America has not seen the end of it yet. But Iran could flip all of that if they just start asking themselves, why are we not trusted by our neighbors? Why the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, even the Moroccans do not trust us? If they do this restructuring, if they do this reset in their positioning next to their neighbors, maybe then we can start this kind of cooperation. There's a deep lack of trust. You can feel it on the street. You can feel it even from the Egyptians. The new Egypt wasn't that friendly to Iran. The Iranians were not honest enough to translate the speech of Morsi properly. If I cannot trust you in translating my speech during a summit, how can I trust you in other matters? The Iranians need to look and ask themselves why our relation is not that good with our neighbors.
You have a generation of leaders across the GCC who for the past 35 years have capitalized on US-Iranian tensions, and they're incapable of thinking outside of this tension between Iran and the United States. As a result, my prognosis for the future is not quite positive.
Do you think there will be a grand bargain?
I think the Iranians and the United States know that they need each other. I can't see with Secretary Clinton sitting in the background gunning for next presidential elections. I can't see it.
I heard that it's quite advanced, and the only problem is the question of Syria. Iran insists that Syria remains within its sphere of influence. Otherwise, a grand bargain is possible.
One of the things which we haven't said specifically, and I've felt this for a long time, is that the West's desire to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, which is perfectly justifiable in many ways, is actually an attempt to hammer a nail into Iran. I think the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah was the same. It's an attack on Iran. This is another way of getting it. Sanctions don't work. You don't have to have violence in Iran. You can have violence in Syria, or you can have some new attack on the Hezbollah. I don't think you can see these things as individual
But there is
incidents.
no war against Iran per se.
No, nobody's dropping a bomb on Iran. Absolutely not. And I don't think the Americans do want to get involved. But remember, over and over again, the leadership in your country, Mohammed, has said, if we are attacked by Israel, it will be seen as an attack by Israel and the United States. And America is extremely vulnerable in the Gulf, in other neighboring countries. If that actually, you know, the big thing you learn about wars when you cover them is once they start, nobody has the slightest idea where they're going to go. Not the First World War, not the Libyan Revolution, etc.
It seems to me that this would be, if the continuation of the status quo would be a failure in the United States, for Washington, for the Obama administration.
They don't want a war with Iran.
But the status quo is a failure.
It's crisis tourism again. As long as they can just keep it down, it's okay. It's okay. Just keep it down.
Are you worried about the year or so that Obama spoke of until Iran gets the nuclear weapon status?
Well, we've been hearing that for many years now.
We have. Yeah.
So I don't take that seriously. I think the major problem is that the United States has to come to the recognition that Iran is an independent country with sovereignty. It's
and a regional power?
And the regional power.
Hence a problem with Saudi Arabia and the rest who don't trust Iran?
I think that the problem really lies with the fact that many countries in the region are not representative. And the people in those countries, the information they receive come from those unrepresentative states.
But in Iran, the main questions like nuclear and others are also in the hands of Ayatollah Khamenei. They're not in the hands of any elected government.
Well, all the elected governments in Iran, whether during the Khatami years or Mr. Rafsanjani or Mr. Ahmadinejad, all of them supported the nuclear program. And when you look again at polls carried out by Western agencies, the overwhelming majority of Iranians support the nuclear program. And the Iranians also know...
But not nuclear weaponization.
No. But the Iranians also know that even if Iran was to capitulate, when it will not, that the United States will not end its hostility and the sanctions. So the Iranians feel that the only way out is for the United States to come to the understanding that Iran is not going anywhere.
On this sobering note, gentlemen, thank you for joining Empire. And I'll be back with a final thought. When a superpower behaves like an NGO, expect lots of talk and little action. In that way, President Obama didn't disappoint. The commander-in-chief, or shall I say the commander-in-speech, seems bent on establishing peace and security, one sermon at a time. But the leader of the world's foremost superpower shouldn't be calling on young Israelis and Palestinians to make sacrifices and take responsibility for the future when he's unwilling to do so himself. Alas, for the last 4 years, Obama has been all too busy keeping his job. He forgot to do his job, allowing his junior partner to expand illegal settlements, deepen the occupation of Palestine, and humiliating America in the process. So let me be clear. Any speech, no matter how eloquent, how bombastic, or how promising, is no substitute for policy. It only risks to repeat history. And the way that goes, first time as tragedy, second as comedy.
Chair recognizes the senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hagel, I think you know that no one in this room cares more deeply about the safety and security of Israel than I do.
What? That is a lie! I love Israel.
Order!
Oh, so now Obama thinks he can wipe out his shameful record of never visiting Israel by visiting Israel. It is a shanda. Do not fall for it, my chosen brethren, my Hebrews.
If that is the sort of bomb we're dealing with, I think I've got a pretty easy solution to this entire Iran problem. We'll be right back.